want to say good afternoon. My name is Kirkpatrick Tyler, and I serve as the pastor here at Parks Chapel AME Church. But I get to be here in another capacity, which is to welcome the author, amen, my uncle, who is the author of his new book, Culture, Politics, Spirituality, and Practice, a book of resistance and critical theory for disturbing times. And you would agree we are in disturbing times. So how timely it is to have a guide, to have thinkers who are looking at the role of our mental health, the role of liberation in these times, and tools for our communities to use and to implement, not just in reaction to, but in response to. And so first, I want to welcome our moderator for this afternoon. I keep wanting to say Reverend Doctor, but I think that's just... but I love, affectionately, many of us know him as Brother Mark, but because of his new achievements, we got to call him Dr. Brother Mark Smith, who is just an amazing thinker, advocate, activist in his own right. And so as we were putting this together and talking about who would be the best person to facilitate this conversation, I could not think of a better person. And so first I want to welcome to the stage Dr. Mark Smith. Amen. Let's give God praise. Come on up. Welcome. Thank you. And I'm not going to talk much after this. So then I want to introduce, he's signing one more book, but I want to introduce my uncle. He is more than that, though. My family has a culture of revolutionary action and leadership, but growing up, it was my uncle who really was my North Star around what it meant to be radical and Christian. He was an example for me and for my cousins about what it meant to stand up for our people. And so it is a privilege to have him here today to celebrate his book, but also to share him with you. So I'll just read what's on the back of the book. Otherwise, I'll be talking here all afternoon about him. Makungu Akinyela is an African studies scholar, activist, family therapist, and ordained minister working for social justice in Atlanta, Georgia, USA. He is a developer of culturally specific approach to narrative practice called testimony therapy, drawing on decades of struggles for human rights and justice for Black people in the United States and the African diaspora. This book is a gift and a challenge to the reader in these critical times. The Book of Resistance and Critical Thinking for Disturbing Times is a clarion call. It calls for forms of decolonizing therapy that can provide a bridge between the counseling room and social action, for fugitive pedagogies in order to protect education as freedom, for critical thinking about culture, and for connecting with ancestral struggle and strengthen contemporary resistance. Significantly, this book also provides a sense of reassuring company to the reader through the personal exploration of spirituality. And so without further ado, I want to welcome Reverend Dr. Makungu Akinyela, the author of Culture, Politics, Spirituality, and Practice, a book of resistance and critical theory for disturbing times. Why don't you put your hands together? So we will have a discussion by Dr. Smith and Dr. Akinyela, and then we'll have some time for question and answer. So let's all prepare to learn and listen, all right?
Well, thank you. It is such a pleasure to meet you. I really enjoyed reading the book, and it covered some themes on, for me, how Black Americans in this political environment and other political environment, how those interactions affect Black mental health and our faith. I wanted to see if you had any overarching themes that you wanted to convey that I might have missed or just didn't hit me. Well, let me see. Is it green? There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciating the question. You hit it. This book is ultimately about Black people's mental health and also our resistance to cultural domination and political exploitation over our journey here inside what's now called the United States, but in particular at this time of rising Trump fascism. So someone asked me, well, how long did it take to write this book? This particular book has been being written over the last 25 years. It's a collection of essays from as early as 2001, as I began to engage in particular in an international community of therapists called the narrative community, but also political essays and speeches that I've done around the 5 areas of the book, right? Dealing with ancestorship, dealing with a revolutionary spirituality, dealing with education or pedagogy, right? So these are, I'm not, it's hard for me just to stick to one interest. All these things, so I'm always thinking about these things and talking about these things, but the thing that ties them together is the question of mental health. And in this book, the thing that ties all 5 areas together is a series of dialogues between myself and the publisher of the book, David Denborough, talking about, well, what does this particular theme or this particular subject that we're writing about have to do with Donald Trump and rising fascist MAGAism inside the United States? Because that's what we mean when we start talking about troubling times or talking about disturbing times. Anybody disturbed right now? And I believe that anything that we write about or talk about today, if it doesn't speak to the immediate of what's going on right now, is pointless.
Okay. Well, I was going to start a little earlier in the book, or not earlier, but actually later in the book. It's not chronologically the first subject, but I'd like to start with the church. Talking about the Black Power and Black Revolution movements of the 60s and 70s, you say our movement at the time, back then, relied a lot on revolutionary theories that were greatly influenced by European ideas, including Marxism, which were devoid of any reliance on God or understandings of spirituality. In fact, these theories ridiculed spirituality and the church. But you go on to discuss the revolutionary origins of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and, more generally, liberation theology. So with respect to Black people in the United States, and I like the term that you use, New Africans, which is, we'll talk more about that. How do you see us incorporating our church and our Christian faith and thinking, in our Christian faith being completely separate from and distinct from the white evangelical movement right now in the United States? But how do you see us incorporating our Christian faith and our church and maybe the thinking of people like Howard Thurman or James Cone in our political and social justice efforts, and also Jesus in our political and social efforts?
What are we going to do with Jesus?
How about him?
Thank you for the question. And that's, that was actually, a lot of that is from one of the conversations with David Denborough. And for me, it's an important question. That last section of the book talks about my engagement with the church. I was totally disconnected from the church from the time I was about 15 when I got involved in political activities. And I'm gonna tell you, I went to my home church, Second AME Church. My first career, I thought I was gonna be an actor and a poet and all those things. I was in a play that was really important. In fact, we produced it here in Pacoima. This ain't Pacoima, is it? Okay, well, it's in Pacoima, right over there. And down the street. But it was a play called The Prison Letters of George Jackson. George Jackson was an important revolutionary thinker who was a social convict, right? And he probably would have even said a social criminal, but over time he became politicized. And he eventually became a political prisoner who died in prison. But the play was about his life and the letters that he wrote, particularly between he and Angela Davis. And we were going all over California producing this. For me, that was my political work, doing cultural work. And we were getting it in churches, we were getting it in community centers all over California. And I went to my former pastor, or I guess he was still then my pastor, maybe, and I asked him, can we put a poster up just talking about this important play? And he went and said, well, you know, he was a convict, wasn't he? He was a criminal, wasn't he? And he didn't let me do it. I did a terrible thing. I cussed the poor man out right there in the vestibule on Sunday morning.
He's your pastor. Your pastor.
He was my family's pastor. And just as I got to the height of my cussing, my mama walked into the vestibule and heard me cussing her poor pastor out. My mama is, you know, she just passed away, but she was a bishop of the church, so she a real church lady. And I looked around to look for my mama to say goodbye, and she was stretched out on the altar as some mothers of the church fanned her out. That was the final break that I had. I was about 18 at that time. That was the final break. I said, I don't want nothing to do with these Negroes who don't care about black people's freedom. And I stayed away from the church till I was about 30 years old, which I also address in that chapter. But the point of that is, one of the things that I've learned, a very important black theologian, Gaylord Wilmore, wrote a book called Black Religion and Black Radicalism. And the main thesis, the main point of that book is, he says, the black church is both the most radical and the most reactionary institution in the black community. And I hold on to that. That's what gives me hope. Because I know for every foolish preacher I see, right, who tries to convince black people to vote for Cuomo in New York, for instance, as opposed to a progressive, you know, liberating-minded Muslim brother, right? I know that there's also preachers like my nephew, right, who got some sense, right? I understand that. Our church, as you said, I believe, began in the most radical tradition. Our church began with black people who first, before they had a church, had a thing called the Free African Society, right, which, quiet as it's kept, was a socialist society, where everybody put in from each according to their ability, and everybody drew out as they needed, to each according to their need. That was a revolutionary practice in the midst of a society much like this one, where slavery was like, you know, it's no big thing. And our people wanted to go to church. They went to the white folks' church, as we will do. Sometimes we just forget and think we got to go to white folks' stuff. And they tried to pray, and y'all know the story. Y'all are good AMEs. They tried to pray. The white folks said, you can't pray down here. You got to pray up there. And the good black people said, just let us finish, and we won't bother you no more. And they went off and they started their own church, which is why we sit here today. That was a revolutionary act at a time when black people were thought to be totally dependent on somebody else, right? That was a radical act, right? Though that same church of people saved the city of Philadelphia, right, from a plague, right? And then the white folks who they saved tried to blame the black people for spreading the plague, right? Until Richard Allen and them wrote a whole essay saying, no, y'all got it wrong, right? This is what the real deal was. Y'all were dying, and we were the only ones who were brave enough to go in and pick up your bodies and take them away, to sit with your sick and take care of them, even though we may get sick. We were willing to do that, right? And so that attitude of resistance, we don't just let people tell a story on us and we don't tell the story. That's also a very important part of the church. I don't forget that when Denmark Vesey organized what should have been the largest not just slave rebellion, but class rebellion in America, because it wasn't just enslaved people, it was working class freedmen and women, right? It was even black business folk, it was black sailors, and they began to organize at their Bible study at Mother Emanuel in Charleston, and began having Bible study and planning, and they just didn't plan with Christians, they planned with hoodoo folk, brother named Gullah Jack, right? So in other words, they didn't get sidetracked by evangelical fear of Africa, right? And they planned with hoodoo folk, and they planned to have the largest rebellion ever, and one of the most important people who was a part of that was Reverend Morris Brown, right, who the college is named for in Atlanta, Georgia, right? That's why he probably ended up in Atlanta. He had to leave Charleston, right? But, so our church has a tradition of both the radical and the reactionary, which is what gives me hope. And for the future, I would believe that, you know, those of us who hold on to that ancestral memory of a radical tradition in these disturbing times, right? You know, old church ways is not going to help us, right? Trying to convince people to like us or to appreciate us is not going to help us. What helped our church get started and helped our church survive is the spirit of self-reliance, self-determination, right? That's for me, every section of this book is ultimately about that idea of self-reliance and self-determination. In these disturbing times right now, you know, there's something that's very important, you know, saying that a lot of people are saying in the street, ain't nobody coming to save us, right? And so it's up to us. That's at the heart of that. I hope I answered that question.
Oh, very much so. And no, thank you for that, because, I mean, I don't know if you were able to hear the sermon from this morning, but I urge you to go to YouTube and watch it later, because Pastor talked about our identity as a church and as a people, as Christians, and even the identity of the Jewish community being hijacked by people who are not really following Christian teachings. That you hear the evangelicals never talk about Jesus. It's amazing. But they talk about Christianity, but never get to the New Testament. Talking about that resistance, in the book you talk about how you see our collective status and circumstances interacting with our mental health. You say the emotional relationship and mental health concerns that families present to you in consultation can best be understood within the social, cultural, and historical context of resistance against racial dominance in the United States. And you also say it's very difficult to hold a family together and really honor love and marriage when you're also struggling against the state. So you give this example of a couple who you were counseling who were experiencing some economic anxiety, though seemingly dealing with it in two different ways or differently from each other. And you said our conversation created a repositioning for you to say your husband is not the problem, your wife is not the problem, the fascist takeover is the problem, and it can feel overwhelming, like drowning. And you talk about the importance of naming and discussing this threat. So, from a political perspective, there's no question that the MAGA fascist crisis is real. The Supreme Court just drove that point home on Friday. Trump is doing real damage to American universities and colleges, to scientific research, to the free press, to the rule of law, and anything resembling a constitutional order in a multicultural democracy. In fact, you referenced Naomi Klein's book, The Shock Doctrine, and I can see the real parallels there. I also think Hannah Arendt's book, The Origins of Totalitarianism, is very relevant. But on the other hand, black people on these shores have been subject to fascist authoritarianism for over 400 years. And every generation of black people in this country have been part of a resistance of some dehumanizing practice, from slavery all the way to mass incarceration. I mean, Trump is different in kind, not just by degree, but how do you, from a perspective of a therapist, how is this era, this MAGA era, different on the psyche of black people? Is it just that we, thought we might have turned a corner when we elected Barack Obama, and now we're angry and disappointed that we're still in battle mode? Or have we actually lost hope? Have we lost are we no longer convinced that the long arc of history really does bend toward justice?
I have faith in the people, first of all, and I don't believe that we will lose. I believe that we will win. I think the truth is, though, that in many ways, as a collective, we've been lulled to sleep, right? Not even before Barack Obama, just the fact that, particularly 1964 Civil Rights Bill, right? That it was like, oh, okay, we're legal citizens now. We're real citizens. There were problems, but it's like, they've been selling this American dream to us, and they've been selling this mythology that the trek of America has been from a good idea that had a few problems, that slavery thing, but we fixed that, and it's been getting progressively better. And the truth of it is, and this is the importance of pedagogy and education. We grew up learning that in school. We grew up hearing that history in school. And so even though we saw some things that contradicted, it seems like, things are getting better. Then we had, like I said, that 1960 thing with John Kennedy getting into office, and he made some great speeches, and our people were actually in the streets and fighting. It wasn't just that. People in Africa were fighting. People in Asia were fighting. People were winning all around the world. We said, there is hope. I come from the baby boomer generation. I see some of us out there, right? We grew up seeing people around the world winning. We grew up. I was born in 1954. That year, the Vietnamese kicked the French out of Dien Bien Phu, right? The Algerians kicked the French out. The Americans started trembling and crumbling. And I grew up in an era when, dang, we keep winning. So we baby boomers have hope. It's like, we watched Dr. King, we heard Malcolm, we saw a progressive arc. And then we saw some results, right? We saw laws passed. Wow, I'm hopeful, right? Even though, and then when you mean Barack Obama, a lot of people really went for the okie doke and got lots of hope when Barack won, right? We got hope. And so in many ways, I think we were lulled. And yes, MAGA is a different thing. I will tell you, no black person living has seen what's going on right now, right? And that's the problem. I think it becomes problematic when we say, oh, black people have been through this before, as if it's okay for us to go through it, right? No, but, none of us, I've seen a lot. I have not seen, now, since I was 18 years old, I told you about that play I did about George Jackson, right? I wrote a whole poem about George Jackson where it reports, fascism is here, like a mad dog biting at your throat, fascism is here, right? So I've been talking about fascism since I was a teenager, and we've been saying fascism, but we had not seen it yet. We saw the move up to fascism. Today we're seeing an almost exact replication to, for instance, what happened in Nazi Germany in 1930. And it took about 10 years to get to the point of burning people in ovens, right? So we have not seen it in this lifetime. Yes, our ancestors saw it under enslavement. Our ancestors saw it in the 1920s. But there will be very few people alive today who've seen what we're seeing today. And I believe we were slightly lulled, and now we're slightly confused. Because as I started this rant off, I have faith in the people, because I think basically it's about getting reorganized. one of the things that I think is really important that I talk about, this increasing pressure, and this is where the place of culture comes in this book. This increasing pressure on us is pushing us to move, to grasp our culture. What our culture does, it shapes our thinking, shapes our identity. For instance, if you'll notice, let's go back to George Floyd. Anybody remember George Floyd? Y'all remember those thousands of people in the street? I don't know about you, but I got happy when I saw those thousands of people in the street all over the country, and I started seeing red, black, and green flags pop up. Now, I've been flying a red, black, and green flag proudly since 1972, right? But now all of a sudden, just regular folks started just going to them, popping up. They wasn't popping up no American flags. Those red, black, and green flags might seem minor, but they're symbolic of a certain determination, of saying, we black, and we're going to put it in your face, right? But not only that, have you noticed over the last few years, black people are grasping and holding on to even little small celebrations. Who's ever celebrated Juneteenth as intensely as it's been celebrated the last couple of years? People going crazy celebrating Juneteenth. My family and I have celebrated Kwanzaa since, again, 1972. Wasn't hardly nobody doing it. Even if you don't burn no candles, people talking about Happy Kwanzaa, right? Now, to somebody who's just kind of looking at society, but me, I'm a cultural sociologist. When I look at shifts and changes in society and see, wow, people are acting differently. People are acting differently. People are holding on to a sense of consciousness. And what oppression does is it intensifies national consciousness, because it's becoming very clear, like Kendrick Lamar say, not only are they not like us, we ain't like them. And it's becoming clear, and as that clarity gets better, our people, I believe, are going to get the strength to fight. We're going to figure it out eventually. I'm going to make another statement. I'll shut up.
No, shut up.
Once we decide to get rid of the Democratic Party, who keeps selling us out, right? And our people figure it out that all they're going to do is they're going to write terrible letters every time Trump signs something. We're going to write a mean letter to him. I wrote a letter to him to let him know that I didn't appreciate what he did. Acting as if this is normal. What these people are doing today is not normal. This is not something that you settle in a back room. This is not something that you settle by writing a nasty letter of disapproval. And until the masses of our people, and I believe it's going to happen, get in the street and refuse to be governable, right? Only that in line with people having meetings. See, if you got a negotiation and no power, what does Frederick Douglass say? Power without a demand, it concedes nothing without a demand. And but I believe, I was happy to see all the white people in the street a couple of weeks ago, right? I don't agree with black people who say we tired and we resting now. We ain't got no time to rest. Ain't no time for the weary. Ain't no rest for the weary. But at the same time, I was happy to see all the white folks in the street. And I believe that as this continues, you'll begin to see more and more black people in the street. And of course, we know that the reaction to black people being in the street will be different. But I got hope in my people. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And to follow up on that, because talking about moving forward, because we do know that had, for instance, January 6th happened when I went to the Million Man March, it would have ended up in body bags instead of, no, I would not. And so you've got 4 years on me, and I think from my perspective, pretty much the same generation, but I'm looking at like my son's generation, he's now 39 years old. So he was born in the Reagan era. And until Trump came along, Reagan was my least favorite president of all time, and that includes people who own slaves. So I know it's different. I know MAGA is really different, but these people weren't just hatched out of an egg. They've been there the whole time. And this guy, Stuart Stevens, wrote this book, and the title of it was All a Lie. So all of the narrative about patriotism, and it was all a lie. They've always been there. I've had friends say that they actually give credit to Trump for lifting the sheet, the veil, and exposing this to us. So this, while it's different, we're still fighting pretty much old same enemies. The children of George Wallace and Strom Thurmond. Are our tactics going to be different? Is our strategy going to be different? And most importantly, is the result going to be different? How are we going to do, especially given some of the things that we're dealing with now? Like, we have 2 million people incarcerated, whereas in 1972, there were only 300,000 people in this whole country in prison, and now we have 2 million. How is it that we're going to deal with this now differently after the war on drugs and the war on poverty, or the war on black people who were impoverished? How is it going to look different now?
I believe that first by defining for ourselves, as opposed to somebody else defining for us the nature of what we're facing. The first 2 chapters of this book are directly on mental health, decolonizing our lives, and both of them talk about the whole idea of decolonizing mental health, which is also the major theme of my next book that's coming out next spring, which is all about mental health. Got another book. It's at the publisher. They're editing it now, but it's a clinical book. But it's still the point of colonization and the things that you mentioned. I believe that for black people, we are people who are still colonized, right?
Talk more about that, because I actually wanted that as a subject, because our whole concept of colonization is mostly Europe colonizing Africa. And I never thought about black Americans being colonized until the MSNBC host, Chris Hayes, wrote
a whole book. It took a white man to write a brilliant book that basically said what me and my friends been saying for 50 years, right? That black people in America are a colonized nation, right? We have to think, what is colonialism, first of all? And I'll go back to why that's important to mental health. But what colonialism does, it's one nation oppressing another nation for the specific economic, political, cultural, and social benefit of the oppressor nation. The important thing here, let's think about some simple things, right? Anybody ever lived in a red-lined community?
Yes.
Right, redlining. Redlining says if you live on this side of the line and you black, you pay significantly higher prices for things, whether it's insurance, whether it's a mortgage, whether it's whatever, because they've outlined this place that says from this place to this place, we're going to take this much money. If you live on this side, when you're usually white, you pay significantly less for the same things. The reason you're able to pay less is because they're making their profits over here by forcing black people to pay more, right? And that's, in economics, that's called super exploitation. I'll give you another example of how it's done. When we were organizing in South Central Los Angeles, the women of our organization went to grocery stores around the city. They went to Westwood, they went to Hollywood, and they looked at prices. And the prices were good prices. They went to the same stores in South Central and looked at the prices for the same products. They were significantly higher, but get this, they weren't just significantly higher. When they looked at the products, you look at the date stamps, and there was out-of-date products. What did they do? They would keep stuff in Westwood until it got old, and they hadn't sold. The stuff they hadn't sold in Westwood, they would send to South Central Los Angeles. Then they jacked the price up. And so that allowed them to have really great prices in Westwood. Again, that's called super exploitation. That's how Europe made money off of Africa, by super exploiting, right? White folks get exploited, right? But super exploitation means you're making money on top of the money that you're making. And this is something we've been used to for years. In colonized societies, the community is cut off and blocked off by barriers and cutoffs. In the 1950s, the United States began creating the freeway system. And those freeways did what? Cut right across black communities, divided people from other areas, divided people from significant institutions and places that they could shop and be in, and they would just cut through. They call it eminent domain. They say, look, we're going to take your property. Well, I don't want you to take my property. We're going to take it anyway. We give you about a penny on the dollar for it. And they took the property and they cut the areas up. So I saw the same thing when I was in Palestine. The Israelis have put a giant wall all across the West Bank so that you could have been a mother who lived in a house here, had a daughter who lived in a house there. That wall has now gone between, whereas before you could just get out your door and walk to your daughter's door. Now you've got to walk 10 miles out the way to get through a checkpoint, if they will let you through the checkpoint, to come back another 10 miles around to visit your daughter who lives right across the street from you, right? That's colonization. That's why black people, we see stuff other places and it resonates with us. When I went to Palestine, I went to a mosque. And in that mosque in Hebron, they had a space up. And a settler had gone into the mosque while people were at prayer, an Israeli settler, gone into the mosque with a machine gun and mowed down all the people in the middle of prayer. I learned about that. I got back to the United States, and the day I got back, the news of what happened to Mother Emanuel with the 9 people in Bible study getting mowed down by what? A settler. A settler, right? Because they thought they have a right to be here and we don't have a right to be here. We've been treated as a colony, whether we know it or not, for 300 years, right? So we are colonized very really. That's the important part. Colonization is becoming a popular term in mental health these days, and in kind of the popular, just like BIPOC, I don't use that term, right? That's a popular thing, and people use it as a metaphor. I argue when it comes to us black people, it is not a metaphor. We are colonized. When you have the police running up and down your street and just stop, what's your ID? For no reason other than they want to see your ID, that's colonization. That's what happened to our brothers and sisters in South Africa. That's what happens to our brothers and sisters in Palestine. That's colonization. That forces us to walk around in what I call the fact of our blackness. How many of y'all walk around and at some point don't pop up in your mind, I'm black? We just walking, all of a sudden, intrusively, you black, right? We walk around constantly in the fact of our blackness. We can't get away from the fact of our blackness. It's like this underlying white noise that's always reminding, I know I'm black, so what? You're always knowing. You walk into a mall and ain't nobody else but a bunch of white people, and you immediately think, okay, I'm black, I gotta be nice. I've gotta watch my body posture so that I don't feel threatening. Right? I just saw a meme. My sister was dancing in the store. She was shopping for clothes, and this white woman says, we have some customers who say they were threatened by your dancing. Right? We are constantly reminded as we walk around in the fact of our blackness, That is what we call coloniality. That experience of being colonized then affects the way we think. Even if you think you're a free person, just the fact that you walk around and every once in a while you just get reminded, you black. Right? That constant reminder. Think about how that impacts our relationships with each other, our relationships with ourselves, the way it impacts our body movements, our postures. It affects every part of us. I'm going to tell you a secret. White people don't walk around thinking they're white. White people don't walk around being just intrusively in their mind, you're white. Right? That's not necessary. Don't even think of themselves as white. The only reason we think of ourselves as black is because we're here. If the colonizer had never gone to Africa and never colonized us, we wouldn't be thinking we black. What's the point of being black? It's like blackness only has significance in the face of what? Whiteness. Right? And so we're constantly going through this thing of being black, and it has emotional and mental effects on us and affects our relationships.
So that being the case, and what we know about colonialism worldwide in Africa as well as in Asia and Latin America, I mean, there's a region that all the Argentinians have Italian last names. All of those colonial environments, for the most part, have in some way, with the exception of South Africa, which is the only place in the world where a settler colonial power voluntarily gave up power. Well, wasn't voluntarily. But without masses of blood, even though they're going to convince you now that, you know, all the white farmers are over there being killed and none of them are. How do we approach decolonizing Black America, if not through the most extreme revolutionary measures?
I think the mental health work is, for me, is important. I mentioned it in this book. I have a whole chapter dedicated. I mentioned it some in this book. I have a whole chapter in the next book on the question of reparations. And I believe that one of the things that in the focus of that is on what can mental health workers do. I believe that it becomes important for us to begin creating what I call healing circles around the country. What if we had a space where people could tell our story? First of all, a part of what makes us crazy is we get gaslit all the time. You know, you start talking about oppression or you start talking about problems, and they say, that's in your imagination. It ain't that bad, right? You know, a brother or sister gets killed by the police, and you got a white friend that says, well, did they do something, right? What did he do to make the police kill him, right? And we're constantly hearing these things, but what if we had an experience where we could create healing circles around the world where people could be guided to, first of all, tell our story to ourselves, to know that we're not crazy, what happened to us, and then be guided to answer the question, to look at, well, how has what happened to us affect us? Let's talk about, you know, the things that have come up because this thing happened. But then be guided to answer the question, despite what happened to us and how it's affected us, what's helped us to hold on? It becomes important for us to know that we're still here and to think about what's given us the strength to hold on. And what if that community could also be guided to talk about their solutions to the problem? See, you asking me, I'm saying that we have to go to the people, first of all. What do you need to heal? And if the people gave their solutions and we began to document those thousands and thousands of stories and thousands of solutions, what we've done is we've documented that, yes, there's something has been done to us very painful. Secondly, it is affecting us, right? We should not walk around acting like, you know, no, oppression is hurtful. It's affected us. But also on top of that, we still here. What are the things that have helped us to survive? That's important for us to recognize. And then what is our solution? Now, I mentioned it in this book, those are called the 4 healing questions. And it's a way to help people give their testimony and to testify as to how, like old folks used to say, how we got over, right? But also to document our own solutions. I believe that having those healing circles, those community circles around the country is an important first step for us to begin putting together our collective story. I believe it becomes then important for organizers, those political workers, to move our people to begin making demands, right? This is, not sitting waiting for people to do something for us, but making demands. I believe it's also important for us to rely on what our ancestors taught us about self-determination and self-reliance. I absolutely believe that we are owed reparations.
Yes.
Right? We are owed, whether they want to give it or not, and they may never get it, but that don't mean we stop demanding it. But at the same time, we don't sit around waiting for white folks to help us. Our ancestors taught us, if folks don't let you go to school, start your own school. If folks don't want you in their hospital, start your own hospital. if folks don't want you to have certain types of organizations or groups, start your own. That's what our ancestors did, right? As opposed to looking around and waiting for handouts. I've got a lot of friends that I grew up with. They spent all of their time on the demand for jobs. We should demand jobs. But also it becomes important for us to build cooperatives where our people are organized around their own economics, right? Cooperative businesses, workers' cooperatives. I'm not talking about independent capitalist businesses, right? You know, but cooperatives where collectives of people get together to either buy things collectively, to produce things collectively. I think if we look around the world, we've seen examples of that in countries where people are oppressed, but they're creating circles, spaces of survival. I believe that's the point that we're being pushed in, because MAGA is making it real clear. They're going to take away every safety net that ever existed. But again, I believe we're going to win. So I've got faith in us.
Pastor, he gave me the signal a couple minutes ago, so.
No, this is amazing. Thank you all for such important conversation. We want to take these last 10 minutes to open the floor up for questions. And so if there's anyone that had a question or a comment or a thought, we'd invite you to share at this time. Is there anybody? All right.
Hi, thank you. How can we go from today and help our families move forward? How can you help our families to move forward?
That's a good question. That's a question that we've had for a long time. Again, you know, I rely a lot on my memory and stories. When I was doing that acting thing in college and stuff and going around doing all these revolutionary plays, one of the plays we did, I can't remember who the playwright was, but it was about a young revolutionary who's trying to convince their parents about, you know, that they needed to join the revolution, and the parents ultimately did not listen. And so at the end, the height of the play is the young revolutionary ended up killing their parents. And we had done that play. Some of our elders said, "Come here." No. This is not the answer, right? This is not how you do it, right? And that was actually influenced probably by another mistake that was made elsewhere in the world. The Chinese Cultural Revolution, where young people were encouraged to snitch on and take out their elders, right? Who didn't fit into the revolution. One of the things that we were taught is that remember that you too were once a Negro until somebody took the time and the patience to teach you. All of us have gone through this place of ignorance. And so it's going to take a whole lot of patience, right? Sometimes I guess you have to do is what we in mental health say, you have to learn how to create healthy boundaries, because you don't want, if your family's foolishness is hurtful or harmful, sometimes you need to have boundaries, but patience. And I think one of the things that we have to avoid as black people, that walk around that fact of blackness, we tend to racialize and pathologize everything so that the thing that one black person do, we assign to all black people. If one black man mess you up on a date, you say, "I don't date black men no more." Right? I don't mess with, we racialize and pathologize, and we have to really be careful and avoid that and understand that it's going to really take some patience. And again, one of the things I emphasize in the book on critical pedagogy is that we have to really focus on asking questions more than giving answers, right? A real organizing for a progressive and a revolutionary movement is about first listening to the people. What solutions do the people bring to us? And then trying to take those solutions and give them back to the people. But first, we've got to listen more than we speak. Does that make sense?
Not safe. My name is Reverend Orr. It's not safe to assume much of anything, but I want to take the position of you're not being born with the name that you have. So why was it? What
whole chapter on that.
What necessitated the change of the name?
There's a whole chapter on naming, the power, the importance of naming. And yes, you are right. In my spirit, I'm not attached to the plantation, but I'm a Tyler. Yeah. All right? You know, I was born a Tyler, right? And that was a struggle from the time I was 18 that me and my mama had for a few years. But again, I came up at a time when I knew from the day I graduated from high school that I wanted to be a part of the revolution. And I went to school right down the street at Cal State University, Northridge. A couple of years after it had been renamed from Valley State College, where in 1968, some of my elder students took over the campus and forced them to establish a Pan-African Studies department. I had a 1.9 grade point average in high school. I like to give people hope with that. But I still wanted to go to college. And so I went and I told, you know, because the students had taken over, they determined who got in. And I said, I want to be a part of the revolution. They set you in. And that's how I got into college. And one of the first things that I did is all these brothers and sisters was walking around with these African names. And I had this slave name, this name of my slave masters. And so I asked my girlfriend at the time, I need you to find me a name that is meaningful, that means something. And she searched diligently and hard. And she knew that I was a writer and a poet. And she knew that I lit up her day. And so she gave me a name, Makungu, which means sunrise or the first signs of a new day. She also says, you should also be Mshairi, which means poet, because I'm a poet. And then she says, and how about Akinyela? Valor will conquer adversity for your last name. And I said, that's wonderful. Then about 3 weeks later, she dumped me. But the name stuck. But for me, again, those were personal decisions that many of us made in the late 1960s, the early 70s, as act of personal self-determination. But that comes from the spirit of our people, being able to name ourselves, speak for ourselves, create for ourselves, and refuse to let anyone else do it for us. And so that's how I got that name, right? That does not mean that I reject my lineage as a Tyler at all, right? That's a proud lineage, but I reject the fact that a white man enslaved my family and imposed that name on them. Our family is greater than that name. Does that make sense? It's in the book. Read it. I talk about that.
All right, we've got time for 2 more questions. Anyone? All right, then we will ask Dr. Akinyela if you have any parting words, and then Brother Mark, Brother Mark, I'll leave the final question for you. And then if you can answer, and then Dr. Akinyela, any parting words that you have for us, and we'll close out.
I'll try not to make the question when it requires too long of an answer. But as we look at what's happening today, I mean, when I say today, I mean like this week, where Los Angeles has become sort of a laboratory for Trump's authoritarianism. When we wake up tomorrow, from a therapist's perspective, how do we prepare ourselves, center ourselves, and then what's the next step for us?
That sounds like yesterday I spoke at First AME at a men's health piece, and I just did a whole thing about mental health. I think it's important for us to, I don't believe in self-care, but it's important for us to take care of ourselves, right? I believe in community care because I think, see, I'm going to get long. Self-care is a project of the neoliberal capitalist plan to make us individuate and only think about ourselves. People talk, I don't have time to support that movement because I've got a massage schedule for that day, right? Or I need some time for myself. I have to think about myself. That's vulgar individualism masquerading as progressive thought, right? Does that mean that we should not take care of ourselves? Absolutely not. And it also means, though, that as a community, we need to be watching our brothers and sisters. Sister so-and-so, you look tired. Why don't you take a break, right? Sister so-and-so, brother so-and-so, you know what? You were kind of intense in that meeting. You know, it's okay to take a vacation sometimes, right? It's okay. We should be watching out for each other. And it also means that it's okay to ask, hey, I know I was supposed to do this thing. Is it okay? But never do anything just in isolation or whatnot. But it becomes important for us to avoid alienation and isolation, which is at the bottom of the mental health problems I believe that our people face. Being alienated from self, being alienated from relationship, being alienated from the larger society, and being alienated from nature. Okay? So what do? It's important that we get enough sleep every night, at least 8 hours of sleep, that we eat fruits and vegetables. It's important that we get some exercise on a daily basis. It's important that we meditate at least 20 minutes a day if you can, where you just allow your brain just to rest, to take some time off. It's important that we take a walk, to get out in nature so you can feel the sun on your skin and notice it, not just sunburn, but notice the heat of the sun and notice the birds that you hear singing and notice the scents that come around so that your body, your senses get reconnected to God's creation, right? I think all those things are really important, and in these disturbing times, it's more important than ever that we stay connected and fight against disalienation. Does that make sense?
Yes. Alienation is a Marxist term, but I get it.
I may not be a Marxist.
I think that kind of would wrap it up then, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and then, amen. Yeah, let's give.
Thank you very much. That was wonderful.
Yeah,
I
thank
love
you.
the book. Everybody should read the book.
Let's give it up for our awesome moderator, Dr. Mark Smith. All right. Dr. Watkins.
So I arrived at CSUN in 1970. So I was there when you arrived and when you took on your new name. And to see you back in this space here, I'm also a former member of Ward AME. So to see you back here, sharing as you're sharing and evolving at such a critical time like this brings us tremendous honor and delight. And so I will take the word back to CSUN that the brothers out there still at work. Thank you so very much.
He is the, Dr. Watkins is being modest. He's the dean of students at CSUN. Right. He's the vice president of administration there. So when he takes the word back, the word's there.
Come on, let's clap our hands one more time. So to all of our family here, we want to say thank you for offering your time to be a part of this. For those who are with us online, we want to say thank you for spending this time. We encourage everybody here who is not already to get your copy here, get it signed. And for those who are with us online, they can go where to get their book?
They can go to sankofatestimonies.com, SANKOFATESTIMONIES.com. And if they order through there, I'll send them a signed copy of the book. But they can also go to, any online store, Amazon, those places. But if they go to sankofatestimonies.com, I'll send them a signed copy of the book.
Awesome. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, once again, we want to say thank you. This is the first time, but not the last time, that we will have these critical discussions with leaders and authors and thinkers. And we want to say thank you, Dr. Mark, for getting us started. Thank you, Dr. Akinyela, for being our first test subject. All right. Again, and those who are here with us, we invite you to stay a little while to fellowship and to get your book signed. And we want to say thank you on behalf of the Parks Chapel family for joining us today. God bless you.
Amen.
And we do have refreshments as you're exiting. My boss is making sure I got it.